Hey there, there's a lot of settings on the Osmo Pocket 3. Some of them are not very obvious and kind of hidden away. We're going to go deep in this video, so grab yourself a drink and settle in. I suggest you watch all the way to the end so you know exactly what the Osmo Pocket 3 is capable of, so you don't miss out on any features that you might not know even exist, and also so you know exactly where to go when you need to solve a specific problem. If this is the first time we're meeting, hi, I'm Jason. This channel's all about making better looking, better sounding and better edited video. If that's interesting to you, please subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Alright, let's get into the settings. Let's start off with an overview of the main user interface. At the top here, this symbol tells you whether you're recording in portrait or landscape video mode. We're currently in landscape mode. I'll show you how to change that in just a second. Next up, we've got this battery indicator, and if you tap on this, you'll get more information. You can see we've got 100% in the Pocket 3 itself and 86% in the battery handle. This section tells you whether you're currently in digital zoom or gimbal up and down mode. You can tap on this to change between the two. If you see this version with the plus and minus signs with a value in the middle, this means you can touch and drag this symbol up and down to change the zoom in and zoom out. This is a digital zoom in. Also, when you see this symbols, the 5D joystick up and down movement actually moves the gimbal up and down. If we tap it and now touch and drag this up and down, we're now moving the gimbal up and down rather than zooming in and out. Also now the 5D joystick, if I move that up, this time the 5D joystick operates the digital zoom instead of moving the gimbal. This symbol on the bottom right allows you to quickly change the gimbal, so if I just tap this, it's going to switch to selfie mode, hello. If I tap it again, it's going to switch to forward-facing mode. You can also triple tap the 5D joystick to do the same thing. At the bottom of the screen, it's showing us the current video recording resolution and frame rate, 1080p 24 frames a second. I'll show you how to change that in just a second. This symbol at the bottom left shows you your current filming mode, and you can also tap this to change the filming modes. If you scroll across to the left, you'll find any custom modes that you've set up. I'll show you how to set up custom modes in just a second. So you can choose panorama, photo, video, low light, slow motion, and some of the hyperlapse modes. Just change it back to video for now. We'll look at each of these modes in more detail later in the video. At the top left here, it's telling us the current recording time left on the SD card, and this will change depending on the resolution and frame rate. This symbol allows you to change to one of the smart gimbal modes, so if I tap on this, we've got face auto detect, dynamic framing and spin shot. If I just come back to face auto detect and tap start, you can see the symbol's changed now, and if I hit record, you can see we get this detecting text, and this box in the middle will automatically lock onto the first face it finds. So if I just triple tap the gimbal a couple of times, so as soon as it sees a face, you can see it's detecting it and it automatically enables tracking of that face. You can see that we're still in face auto detect mode because this symbol is yellow and we've got this box. To disable it, once again tap on the left and then tap exit to turn off face auto detect. Let's take a look at the next smart gimbal mode, and that's dynamic framing. Dynamic framing allows you to select one of a number of different focus points. I'll just click start, and you can use the 5D joystick now to switch between all of these preset points. Now if I press in the 5D joystick, it's going to lock onto that point. You can see active track's been enabled, and now if that light were to move around, it would be tracked. To turn it off, tap on the smart gimbal mode icon and then tap exit. The third of the smart gimbal modes is this spin shot mode, and this rotates the camera around as you're recording to create a kind of spinny, trippy move. You can choose between 90-degree spin shot mode, and if I just tap this left icon, you can see we get that spinning mode. If I tap this, it will spin all the way back to the other side. And you can change this to 180 mode, which will spin around a bigger rotational circle. And if you tap it again, it'll go back the other way. And to exit that, tap on it and choose exit. If you swipe up from the bottom, this is going to give you access to changing of resolutions and frame rates. It's also going to let you change the aspect ratio. So the options that you see here will depend in what mode you're in. We'll look at all the different modes in just a second. Because we're in video shooting mode, we get access to frame rates 24, 25, 30, 48, 50 and 60 in all of these three resolutions. And if you tap at the top right here, you get to change the aspect ratio between 16:9 or 1:1 square. When you're in a 1:1 aspect ratio, you don't get 4K, you only get 3K. But you still get access to all of these frame rates. It's going to change back to 16:9. In portrait mode, you'll get to choose an aspect ratio of 9:16 or 1:1 square. Let's take a look at the different filming modes. You can get access to those by tapping on the bottom left, and annoyingly this screen vanishes really quickly, so I hope they fix that in a future firmware update. Tap it and then scroll left and right to choose your filming modes. And you can see on the left here we've got these custom modes. Let's take a look at Pano mode or Panorama mode. This is a photo mode and it will allow you to take panoramic photos. If you swipe up from the bottom, you get these choices. You can do a 3x3 pano or a 180-degree pano, and you can set a countdown for how quickly you want this to start. Let's change this to normal photo mode now. This allows you to take normal photos, and if you swipe up from the bottom, you can choose whether you want the photo to be 16:9 or 1:1 aspect ratio. And you've got these countdown options. Tap it again and then swipe across and we'll go into video mode. This is the mode you'll probably use most of the time, and we just saw the different resolutions that we can get access to in video mode. Next up, let's go and switch to low light mode. This mode uses intelligent auto exposure to try and get the best image in low light conditions. Just be aware that active track's not supported in this mode, and if we swipe up from the bottom, we only get 24, 25 and 30 frames a second resolution, and we can only choose between 1080 and 4K. The next mode we're going to look at is this slow motion mode. Notice for all these different modes, the icon on the bottom left changes, so you always know what mode you're shooting in. If you swipe up from the bottom, you can change which slow motion mode you want to use. So we've got resolutions 1080, 2.7 and 4K in landscape mode here. If you want to shoot at 240 frames a second, you have to switch to 1080p to get access to that. And in 4K, you can choose between 100 frames a second and 120 frames a second. Just be aware that these modes bake in the slow motion effect to the video file that's recorded on the SD card. That means you don't have to slow it down in video editing software. You should also be aware that when you're shooting in slow motion mode that you don't get any audio in the video file. You do, however, get a separate audio file recorded to the SD card. Let's take a look at the next mode, and these modes are all of the different lapse modes. Once again, the icon at the bottom left changes, and if we swipe up from the bottom, we can choose the type of lapse mode that we want. Scroll all the way to the left. The first choice is for hyperlapses. All of these lapse modes allow you to essentially compress the passage of time in the video and turn long events into short videos. You're going to want to use the hyperlapse mode when the camera is moving, for example, if it's in a car or you're walking with it, and we can choose between how fast we want to speed up time essentially with these rate multipliers. You'll have to experiment depending on the exact situation that you're working with for the effect you want. And if you tap at the top right here, you get to choose the resolution, and you can see here that there's different limitations. We only get to choose between 25 and 30 frames a second. Just tap to go back. If I scroll across, we can get over to time-lapse mode. You want to use this mode when the Pocket 3 is not moving. For example, getting a time-lapse of a sunset or a cityscape. There's a number of different presets here: crowds, clouds, sunset. All of these are going to set preset timings up for you, but you can also scroll across and tap on custom, and now you can swipe up to set those custom parameters. The interval sets how long you're going to wait before each frame or each photo of the time lapse is going to be captured, and here we can set the total duration of filming time. So if you set a total duration of filming time in real time in the real world of 1 hour with a 2-second interval, you're going to end up with a video that's 1 minute and 12 seconds long, and if you increase the interval, you're only shooting a frame every 5 seconds now, so the total video duration that gets recorded is reduced to 28 seconds. The third option is motion lapse. This is a bit like the time-lapse mode, except this time the gimbal is actually going to move around while it's taking photos that get merged into the finished time-lapse. Tapping on the top right gives you access to the frame rates and resolutions. Notice that this is still limited to 25 and 30 in this mode. Tap the top left to go back. You can choose whether you want the gimbal to move from the left to the right to the left, or in custom motion. Choose left to right and swipe up from the bottom. You get access to the same kind of parameters, the interval and duration. Just tap that to go back. Right to left gives you those same parameters, it's just going to move in a different direction. And in custom mode here, you get to choose a number of waypoints. If I swipe up to set the parameters, once we exit that screen, it's going to tell us to rotate the gimbal and then tap plus to set a waypoint. Now you can move this gimbal to where you want the motion lapse to start and tap the little plus icon in the middle, and at the top this goes to blue, and then you can set a second waypoint. Tap the plus icon, now it turns to a blue tick. And if I tap play on the right here, we get a preview of what the motion is going to look like. And then if I tap record, it's going to tell us that we're going to record soon. And now the motion lapse starts recording and the gimbal will start moving through each of those 2 waypoints. Just going to stop that. And we'll just switch back to video mode. Let's take a look next at the control menu, which you can access by swiping down from the top. And we'll go and tap this icon at the top left to have a look at this first option. And this allows you to save custom shooting modes. So at the minute we've got C1, C2 and C3 set up. And it tells you the settings here. If you want to add a new custom preset, scroll over to where you see the plus and tap plus. This will add a new custom preset. C4, tap confirm, and it will set a preset shooting mode for whatever video settings you've got set up. Tap on the bottom left. Now you can see if I scroll across to the left and right, we've now got this new C4. Let's come back to the control menu. The second icon along is this rotate screen and capture. It's going to automatically start recording as soon as you rotate the screen to power on the Pocket 3. When you've got this enabled, you can choose what video mode you want to automatically start recording in. You can choose the last settings you had. You can choose video mode, low light, hyperlapse. If you always want to use the last settings, click this, but I suggest that you probably want to use one of a known set of modes to automatically record in, just in case you've switched the last mode that you used to something weird. So in this case, let's choose C1 video, because that's a known custom video mode. And you can see now that that icon turns yellow. If I just power off the gimbal, close the screen. Now when I rotate the screen, the gimbal's going to turn on and you should see the automatic recording starting, which you do. If you're wondering why I keep putting it back up here, it's just so you can see everything on screen clearly. I'm just going to turn that off, so I'll swipe down from the top and tap this icon and then turn this mode off. It's handy sometimes if you're doing quick run and gun vlogs, but it can be annoying. Tap back to get back to the control menu. Next up, we've got this brightness icon. This allows you to set the brightness of the screen. I normally just leave this set to 100%. And by the way, the screen has been fine for me, even filming in bright sunshine here in Australia in the middle of the day. Next up on the top right, we've got this icon, and if I tap this, you can see it's turned on FT selfie mode. FT stands for face track, and this will automatically recognize and follow your face to ensure the best selfie or vlogging angle. I'll just swipe back up to get back to the main screen, and I'll just scroll back to me, and you should see tracking automatically start as soon as it detected my face, which you do. If I move around now, it's going to try and keep the best angle for that selfie shot. To cancel it, just press the 5D joystick and it will cancel that tracking mode. To turn it off, swipe down and then tap it once again to turn face track selfie mode off. At the bottom right, we can select one of the gimbal follow modes. You can choose between follow, tilt locked and FPV. Follow mode is a general purpose mode, and you can use this for vlogging or for selfies, and it follows the tilting so you can look up and down, and it also follows the panning, so if you move left and right, the gimbal will move left and right. It's still going to keep things upright, but it does differ in one main way to this tilt lock mode. Tilt lock mode is best if you're doing pans left and right, or if you're moving towards or away from a subject. Basically, it locks the tilt axis on the gimbal, so it will keep the horizon in the same place even if you move the Pocket 3 up and down. It still follows panning left and right, just doesn't allow you to look up and down. But you can, however, use the joystick to reposition the horizon before you start the pan. The third option is this FPV mode, and it just gives you that FPV drone look. In this mode, it follows the pan and the tilt, and unlike the other two modes, it also follows the roll. So you can use this for creative effects if you want to become a human FPV drone. Just going to switch this back to tilt lock, tap the top left to go back to the control menu. Next up, we've got this gimbal rotational speed. You can choose between slow, default, and fast. If you set this to slow mode, the gimbal's going to move a lot more smoother and slower, and it's going to give you a more movie-like or a more cinematic experience, if you don't mind me using that word. Default rotational speed is kind of the medium speed, and you can use this for general purposes such as vlogging, and you've also got fast speed. You might want to use this if you're tracking fast-moving subjects, or if you want to create an energetic or a hectic look and feel to your video. Just going to set it back to default. Tap the top left to go back to the control menu. I hope this video so far is providing a ton of value on how to set up your Pocket 3. If it is, please subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. Alright, back to the settings. Next up, this button allows you to switch between landscape and portrait mode, so I'm just going to tap it. The icon in the control menu changes to this portrait icon, and if I just swipe up to close the control menu, this icon's now changed to show portrait mode. Tap it again to set auto rotation, or tap it again to choose landscape. If you set this mode to auto rotation, the recording mode is going to depend on how this physical screen is rotated. It's going to swipe up to close the control menu, and if I rotate the screen now, we're now recording in portrait or vertical video mode, and if I rotate the screen, we're now recording in landscape. Personally, I like to set this to a specific value so I always know what I'm recording in. The last button in this control menu allows you to access these settings. So if I tap on the bottom left, we get access to loads of different settings. So we'll go through these one by one. First off is this wireless mic setting. If we tap on this, we'll get a number of different options. If you're not using the DJI Mic 2 wireless mic connected to the Pocket 3, these are not going to be changeable, and they'll all be greyed out, as you can see here. We'll cover internal microphone settings later in this video, but if I just turn on my DJI Mic 2, it connects to the Pocket 3 automatically, and if I just tap this to get rid of it, now this icon is enabled. It's showing us the battery life and the current internal recording capacity of the built-in internal recording on the transmitter, and as I'm talking you can see this bar moving up and down, which is monitoring the audio volume. If you need to pair a DJI Mic 2, you can tap on this icon and then go through the procedure to pair the microphone with the Pocket 3. I'm not going to do that here. Once you've connected a DJI Mic 2, you can scroll down and access all of these other settings. The first of which is this monitor volume. You can change that. This affects the headphone volume if you've got a USB to headphone adapter attached to the Pocket 3. And if we scroll down, we can access some transmitter settings. The first of which is this LED setting. If I tap that, it's going to turn off all of the LEDs on the DJI Mic 2 and tap to turn it back on. You can also choose whether you want the vibration on or off in the DJI Mic 2 transmitter. For example, you might want to turn this off if it annoys you or the subject. Otherwise, I recommend leaving it on, as it's a kind of a safety check in case you accidentally stop recording. The next option is this audio to video sync. If you've got this turned on, it's going to automatically start internal recording on the DJI Mic 2, as long as it's connected, of course. So you're always going to have that backup internal recording on the transmitter itself. This is, however, a terrible name for this setting. Next up, we've got the low cut option. If this is turned on, the transmitter is going to automatically filter out low frequencies below 150 Hz. And it's going to try and make the recordings clearer because it's filtering out those lower frequency sounds such as rumbles. Just be aware that this might affect the sound of your voice. So I usually have this turned off because it's better to do this in your video editing software with an EQ plugin because you've got more control. The next option is to enable or disable 32-bit float recording. This applies only to the internal recordings on the DJI Mic 2 transmitter. This means that the audio files that get recorded internally will be 32-bit float. This will give you a larger audio dynamic range, which means a lower likelihood of the audio clipping if you talk too loudly. Just be aware that you can still overload or distort the audio if the microphone itself is overloaded, if you're really loud and you talk really close to it. The next option is to format the transmitter, and if I tap on this, it's going to give us the option to cancel or confirm. That will erase all of the audio files on the transmitter. We can't format transmitter 2 because we don't have one attached. And finally, we can get access to the current firmware that's installed on the transmitter. Let's go back and exit the wireless mic settings, and next we can set the gimbal startup direction. If you tap on this, you've got three options. You can have the gimbal startup facing forwards, backwards, or to the last used settings. Forward mode points away from you and the screen. Backwards mode points towards you if you want to do selfies. I tend not to use last setting, and I always tend to use either forward or backwards because I want the gimbal starting up in a known direction. Tap the top left arrow to go back to the settings menu, and now we'll scroll up and take a look at this rotate screen to power off. If we tap on this, we get a number of different options. We've got 2 seconds, never, or now. This is currently set to 2 seconds, so I'll show you what happens if I just exit the menu and rotate the screen. We get a 2-second countdown before it automatically turns off. Just turn it back on and come back to that menu setting. If you set this to never, then the gimbal will never automatically turn off when you rotate the screen. And if you set it to now, you won't get that 2-second delay to keep the camera on. I tend to keep this to 2 seconds just to give me a chance to cancel it. Next up is this slider control setting. We get to choose what that button on the right hand side of the screen does, gimbal or zoom. And so inversely what the joystick does when you move it up and down. This setting is basically doing exactly the same thing as tapping this icon on the right hand side to change between those two modes that we looked at earlier. Right, back into the settings. The next option is to enable or disable this selfie flip option. What this does, it will change the recorded video file, but it doesn't actually affect what you see in the screen while recording. So this can be a bit confusing. It only affects things if the gimbal's pointing backwards at you. So for example, say you're recording a selfie with words on your t-shirt. This mode is turned on, then the words on the t-shirt will be back to front in the video file when you watch it back. But if you turn this mode off, when you watch the video file back, the words will be correct on the t-shirt. Next up, we've got this built-in mic audio backup option, and this is actually a pretty cool feature. You can see it's currently turned on. It Basically, you just get to turn this off or on. When it's turned on, it will record audio to a separate audio file on the SD card, but the video still has the audio in it as well. It works whether or not you've got the DJI Mic connected, but it does make most sense when you've got DJI Mic connected. In case you forgot to turn the mic on, for example, you still have a backup audio file that you can sync with the video on the SD card. And as you can see from this warning at the bottom, it doesn't work in all video modes. So I normally have this turned on because why not? Next up, we've got this OTG connection option. This will allow you to connect to an Android OTG capable phone to view and transfer photos and videos using the Android device's album or file management app. And you can use the USB cable supplied in the box for this. Next up, we've got this wireless connection setting. If I tap that, it's going to give you the wireless info. For example, if you want to connect to the Mimo app. And you can also change the Wi-Fi frequency. It's currently set to 5.8 gigahertz. And if you want to, you can tap this to reset your Wi-Fi connection and password. I'll just tap cancel because I don't want to do that. On the top left to get back to the main settings menu. Next up, we've got this wearable mode. And if we tap that, it's going to ask you to confirm whether or not to enable it. When this is enabled, the gimbal will move and lock into selfie mode, and it also will lock in tilt lock mode. You can use it to get a first person view. So if I just tap confirm to enable it, if you want to get out of this mode, you need to swipe up from the bottom to disable that mode. You can use the optional Osmo Pocket 3 expansion adapter if you want to use this mode. Next up, we've got this gimbal calibration option, and if you tap this, you can start the gimbal calibration process. So calibrating your gimbal can reduce gimbal drift where things move out of alignment a bit. This can be caused by human error or nearby magnetic interference, but if you do tap confirm to start this, don't hold the gimbal during calibration. Make sure it's on a flat, stable surface. Just going to tap cancel because I don't want to do that at the minute. Next up, we've got this joystick speed, and if you tap this, you get to choose two different settings. On the left here, you get to choose how the joystick affects the speed of the digital zoom, and on the right, you get to choose how the joystick affects the speed of the gimbal moving. I'd recommend using the lowest gimbal speed setting here if you're going to be recording videos while using the joystick to do panning movements. Once you've chosen these two settings, tap confirm to save. Next up, we get to choose the video compression mode. You get to choose between efficiency, HEVC, and compatibility, H.264. HEVC mode records the H.265 video codec, which means smaller video files, which means more videos fit on the same size SD card, but it can be harder to edit for some computers. Compatibility mode uses the H.264 video codec, which means larger video files, which means less videos fit on the same size SD card, but it's usually easier to edit, especially on older computers, and it's compatible with more things. I personally use the HEV setting because I've got a powerful enough PC so I can edit them easily, and I get more space on my card. Let's go back to the settings menu. Next up, you get this sounds option, and if we tap this, you can choose the volume of the internal sounds, high, medium, and low. And if I just tap cross to go back to the main screen, you'll hear these sounds, for example, when you hit record and when you stop record, which I find super annoying. So I normally have this set to mute so I don't get any sounds. The next option in the settings menu is for reference lines, and if you tap this, you've got a couple of different options. You can turn on grid mode, and if I just tap cross, now we get the rule of thirds grid. This can help with composition, and if we go back to that option, I'll just turn off grid and turn on 2.35:1 guides. This gives you these lines at the top and bottom, so you can use this if you want to compose your video and edit in a widescreen movie-like format of a 2.35:1 aspect ratio. You can have both grid and this 2.351 turned on at the same time, but it can get a little crowded on the screen. Next up, we've got this anti-flicker settings option, and you've got three options if you tap this. You've got 50 Hz, 60 Hz, and auto. These options can help prevent that flicker caused by things like fluorescent lights or TV screens when you're recording videos. So you should select the frequency here of the region that you're recording in according to the power grid in that region, or you can set this to auto. Try and let the Pocket 3 figure it out for itself. Next up, we've got timecode, and if we have a look at this, you can see it's telling us that we can connect a USB adapter to the USB port and sync the timecodes from an external timecode source. You can also use the built-in timecode here, and if you scroll down to the bottom, you can tap reset timecode and confirm that, and that will reset the internal timecode to 0, or you can use the Pocket 3 system time by tapping this icon here, and now the timecode will be set to the date and time on the Pocket 3. Next up, we've got this naming management. If we open this up, you can set independent naming for the folders and files that get saved onto the SD card. So for example, if you have multiple Pocket 3s, you can have each video file with a custom file name postfix. So currently it's set to AA01, but you might want to set this to something like Pocket 01. Then on the other Pocket 3, you can set this to Pocket 02. So you'll always know which Pocket 3 your files came from. And if you want to reset these back to the factory defaults, you can just tap these icons here. One thing to note is that it doesn't change the existing files on the SD card that have already been recorded. Alrighty then, next up, we've got screen off when record. This allows you to turn off the Pocket 3 screen when you're recording video. You can set this to turn off after 3 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or never. I usually have this set to never because I always want to see what I'm recording, but you could set this to turn off to save battery life, for example, or other examples you might want to turn the screen off include long single take walking videos or long time lapses, or if you're doing a long single take interview and you want to preserve battery life. Similarly, we've got this auto power off option. This is currently set to 5 minutes, but you can choose 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, and 30 seconds. This will automatically power off the Pocket 3 as long as you're not recording something after that set amount of time. The next setting allows you to turn off the LED on the Pocket 3. You might want to turn this off if you're filming at night with the screen off and you don't want your night vision to be disturbed, or if it annoys you. The next option is this continue live stream option. Basically, if you're using the Mimo app to do live streaming, you can use this to continue the last live stream with the Mimo app that you were doing. Just tap back because we're not doing that. The next option allows you to set the language. I'm just going to leave that to English. This is the language for the menus. Next up, we've got the format option. You can tap that, and if you want to format the internal SD card, you just swipe this across to format it. I'm not going to do that at the minute. Next up is the factory reset option. If you're having major problems with your Pocket 3, you might want to try and do this, or support might ask you to do this, to reset everything back to the factory defaults just to see if that fixes the problem. The last but one setting is this device info. This just gives you access to the firmware, names and serial numbers of all the different components of your Pocket 3. And you've also got this option at the bottom to export a log to the SD card. DJI support might ask you to do that sometimes. And last up in this menu, we've got compliance info, which just tells you the regulatory information. I'm going to tap this cross at the top right to go back to the main screen. Alright, next up is exposure compensation while you're recording a video. So if you're not recording and you swipe from the right here, you get these options, which we'll look at in a minute. If I just hit record, and then while we're recording, swipe from the right, you get access to this exposure compensation slider. If you tap and hold and slide this down to a negative EV value, the video will get darker, and if you slide this up to a plus EV value, the video will get brighter. This just lets you compensate for what the Pocket 3 thinks it should be recording in terms of exposure. This works in non-pro mode, and it also works in pro mode with auto exposure turned on. We'll get to pro mode in just a second. Also, different modes have different things you're able to change. We'll get to those limitations in just a minute. So we're not currently recording. I'll swipe from the right, and you can see at the top here this Pro button is not turned on. That means we only get access to a couple of options in non-Pro mode. The first of which are these glamour effects, and if I tap this, it's telling us to connect to the DJI Mimo app to view what these effects look like. You won't actually see the effect on the screen here. And glamour mode lets you make your teeth whiter, give you fake lipstick, change the shape of your face and all that kind of thing. I'm not going to show you that in this video. In non-pro mode, the only other thing we can set is this image adjustment option. I'm just going to rotate the screen so you can see these settings a bit better. So if I tap image adjustment, we can choose the default values for sharpness and noise reduction. But if we tap custom, we can dial in our own custom settings for both noise reduction on the right here and sharpness on the left. The sharpness setting basically sets how crisp your videos will look. You can set this from anywhere from +2 all the way down to -2, and you might want to experiment with something like -1 or -2 if you think your videos look too digital and too sharp. Noise reduction is how much noise is reduced from things like high ISO and dark conditions. You can set this from +1 down to -2. But if you have a lot of noise reduction happening, it can make the video look a bit plasticky or soft. So you should definitely experiment with this to get the look and feel that you like the most. I'm just going to set this to -1 and -1, because remember that you can apply noise reduction and sharpening when you're editing your video in post-production. Tap confirm to save those settings. All right, let's take a look next at Pro mode. To turn on Pro mode, tap the Pro button. It turns yellow to indicate you're now in Pro mode, and you get access to loads more options now. now. So why might you want to use Pro Mode? Basically because it gives you more control. It allows you to set stable exposure or white balance that's not going to change while you're recording your video. You can use it for creative uses. Basically you're in control, not the Pocket 3. The options that you can choose depend on the shooting mode you're in. This table shows you what you have control of. So for example, in low light mode you can't change image adjustment parameters, the sharpness and noise reduction. You have video options. If you tap the microphone you have audio options. We'll have a look at those in just a minute. And in the video options, the first thing you have control over is exposure. So if we tap the exposure icon, we get a couple of different choices, and I'm just going to rotate the screen because I think it's easier to see in landscape. So because the Pocket 3 has a fixed aperture of 2.0, it means that the only way we can control how bright or dark the image is, the exposure, is if we change the shutter speed or the ISO. We can also add ND filters, but that's for another video. You can choose between manual exposure or auto exposure here. I'm going to start off with manual settings. In manual settings you get to control the shutter speed and the ISO. You can control the shutter speed by scrolling down or up here. This will make the image brighter or darker. Normally you're going to want to set this shutter speed to be double your frame rate or as close to it as you can get. So for example, if we were shooting in 30 frames a second, we'd want to try and set this to 1/60th of a second. The 60 is double the 30 FPS. You can go all the way up to 1/8000th of a second if you're shooting on a really bright day, but that's probably not going to look too good. And you can go as slow a shutter speed all the way down to 1/25th of a second if it's really dark or you want to try and get some creative effects. We'll just set this back to 160 for the minute. The other thing you can control in manual mode is the ISO. So you can set a specific fixed ISO, so from 50, 100, 200, all the way up to 1600 and eventually 3200 if you're filming in really dark conditions. If you choose one of these fixed values, then the Pocket 3 won't compensate for changes in light. At the top left here you can see this exposure value. It's at EV -1 at the minute. If I lower the ISO, come on, now it changes to EV -2. A negative number means that it's too dark or underexposed, and if I change this to a higher fixed ISO, now we're at +2.3 EV, and that's telling us that we're now overexposed and the image is probably going to be too bright. The EV value displayed also changes in response to changing the shutter speed. It's the Pocket 3 giving you some indication of whether it thinks that your video will be too bright or too dark. As well as choosing a specific fixed ISO, if you scroll all the way to the top, you can choose one of a number of ISO ranges. When you do this, notice you get a little A symbol at the top here. This will allow the Pocket 3 to change the ISO, but only within the range that you specify. So you can choose a range of 50 to 100, which is quite a small range, 50 to 200, 50 to 400, 50 to 800, 50 to 1600, or 50 to 3200. You're basically limiting the maximum ISO the Pocket 3 will set, because a greater ISO usually means more noise in the image. Also notice when you change from a fixed ISO here, watch what happens at the top left when I change to an ISO range. Now we've got this EV value in yellow at the top here. The ISO range is currently set to 50 to 400, but if we change this to 50 to 100, that's going to limit the maximum ISO to 100. Now the EV value changes to -2, indicating that the Pocket 3 can't set a high enough ISO to get a good exposure. But we can, however, tap this yellow EV value at the top here, and now notice that the shutter speed has changed to this EV value. What we can do now is dial in plus or minus EV values to correct whatever the Pocket 3 thinks is the correct ISO. Notice when we're changing these EV values, the shutter speed that we set, 1/60th of a second, has been fixed. So it's not going to change the shutter speed, it's just going to change what the Pocket 3 thinks is the correct exposure. Instead, you can tap the top left again to go back to shutter speed setting. As well as manual exposure mode, you can change to auto exposure mode. This allows you to only select the ISO range, so 50 to 100, 50 to 200, and all the way up to 50 to 3200. You can't specify your fixed shutter speed here, but you can specify an exposure value adjustment, so a positive value to make the image brighter or a negative to make the image darker. And while we're doing this, it's telling us the shutter speed that it's going to set for the current lighting conditions. So if we specify -3 EV, we're going to have a shutter speed of 1/100th of a second. And if we make it really brighter to +3 EV, now we're going to get 1/25th of a shutter speed. So once you're happy with the settings, tap confirm to save those. The next setting you can change in Pro mode is the white balance. To do that, tap on the WB here and you can choose either auto white balance. In this mode, the camera will continuously change the white balance while you're filming, which can result in weird changes in color if you're moving between different kinds of light sources. And you can currently see on the screen here what the camera thinks is the current white balance. If I just change things a little bit, you can see that white balance changing as I move things around. If you don't want auto white balance, you can hit M to change to manual white balance mode, and now you can choose a fixed white balance which won't be changed by the Pocket 3 while you're recording videos. For example, you could change this to something like 5500 Kelvin if you're recording outside and it's midday and it's a clear blue sky. Once you've decided what you want to set up, tap confirm to save. If I just scroll down, as before we've got glamour effects, which I'm not going to go into in this video, and the next option we have is this color mode. For the color mode, we can record in normal mode. That means there's no color grading required to use the video file in editing. And if you don't know much about color grading, this is the one to use to start with for sure. The next color mode we can choose is D-Log-M. This is a low saturation, low contrast filming mode, and it does require color grading while you're editing your video to make it look normal. You can get a larger dynamic range of darker to lighter parts of the image, but there are some problems which I'll talk about in a future video. The next color mode you can choose is HLG. This gives you a wide range of colors, a wide dynamic range when it comes to dark and light areas, and it's really for display on HLG compatible TVs or monitors, but you can also use it when you're color grading. We've got this image adjustment which allows you to adjust the sharpness and noise reduction, which we've already talked about. This is separate from the non-Pro mode settings. And the final thing we get access to is this focus mode. If I tap this, just rotate this so we can see it a bit better. By default, you're going to be in this continuous focus mode, and that means that the focus is always going to change to what the Pocket 3 thinks is the subject in the image. You can also change this to single focus mode. When you're in this mode, you want to tap to focus on what you want to stay focused on, and the focus will stay that way until you tap the screen again. And you can use this for things like reveals from behind a subject or subjects that stay at the same distance from the camera. We'll just confirm that and head back to the main screen. And now if I tap somewhere to autofocus, it's going to autofocus and turn yellow, but if I move things in front of the camera, because we're in single focus mode, the focus doesn't change. The third focus mode that you can choose is this product showcase mode, and this will quickly focus on things held closer to the camera while you're recording. So for example, like holding up a product if you're reviewing it. Once you've chosen a focus mode, tap confirm to save it. So that's all of the video related Pro mode settings. If you tap this little icon here, you can switch over to the audio related Pro mode settings. If you don't have the DJI Wireless Mic 2 attached, you have a different set of options. So we're currently using the internal mics in these settings. You can choose the channel, whether you want the audio recorded in stereo or mono in the video files that get recorded to the SD card. You have this wind noise reduction option. You can set that to on or off. This will try and reduce those nasty wind sounds while you're recording. And you also have this directional audio setting. You can set this to front, front and back, or all. The Pocket 3 has 3 internal microphones built into it, one on each side where there's not the screen. If you set this direction to all, it's going to record sound from all of those 3 microphones all the way around the Pocket 3. If you set this to front, it's just going to record from the front sounds. And if you set this to front and back, it's going to record only from the front and back sounds. So you can use this to help reduce wind noise and other noise. You're going to want to try a few different options depending on the situation you're filming in. Alright, if I go and reconnect my DJI Wireless Mic 2, we get a different set of options. The first thing to notice is that icon at the top changes now to tell us we're working with settings for the DJI Wireless Mic 2. Because we're only using one microphone at the minute, these 2 top options are disabled because these only really make a difference if you're using 2 microphones connected at the same time. If I just scroll down, the first option we can change is this transmitter 1 gain. This affects how much the transmitter will amplify the volume of your voice before recording it in the video file. And you definitely want to set this and customize it for your own personal voice, depending on how loud or how quiet you talk. Once you've set the value that you want here, tap the back arrow to go back. If you want to mute the transmitter, turn this to on. When you do that, the red LED pulses on the DJI Mic 2, and you're also able to turn on the noise reduction for the transmitter. You can try having this turned on if you want to try and reduce annoying background noises in the audio, but you can also use noise reduction software when you're editing your video. We just covered a ton of settings in that video. I really hope you found it valuable. Make sure you check out this video next to go even further and get really the best out of your Osmo Pocket 3. I'm Jason Roberts, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.